Well, hello, Faith Church. We're continuing on looking at the story of Samson, looking at him as God has called him to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines, and gifted him with this extraordinary strength, and just looking at how Samson is going about fulfilling that calling and not doing a very good job. And just so, a question we're asking ourselves is the calling that God's put on our lives to go and make disciples, who make disciples, and the gifts that He's given us and the places He's placed us to fulfill that calling. So, yesterday we read about Samson. He's already going down a wrong road, wrong direction. He wanted to take a wife from the Philistines and did a bunch of other, which is disobeying the law right there, broke some of his vow to God as well as some other laws, disobeying his parents, and letting his anger and arrogance get the best of him. And so he doesn't even get done the wedding celebration on the last day there. He ends up going out and on this personal vendetta and kills 30 Philistines and takes their clothes. And so here at the beginning of chapter 15, what we see is he's now going back to pick up his bride. And so he goes back to the town to get his wife and take her home, and he gets there and the father says, didn't think you were coming back. I gave her to another man, to your best man actually from the wedding. And so this makes Samson really angry, and he goes out and he captures, it says he captures 300 foxes or jackals, probably more likely jackals, and he ties a torch between their tails and then lets them loose. So because there's two, they wouldn't just run home to their burrow. They're kind of going to go just crazy, or going to be, and he lets them loose into the grain fields, and they just run wild through the grain fields, burning down the grain fields and towns and everything as they go. And so the Philistines find out, and they're of course quite angry, and so they get this army together, and the first thing they do is go to one of the towns in Israel with 3,000 men, and they go and do a raid on this town in Israel and say, you need to bring us Samson or we're going to keep doing this. And so Judah, the men of Judah, Israel, 3,000 men go and they find Samson and they say, Samson, we need to hand you over to the Philistines because otherwise they're going to keep raiding us. So they're kind of ticked at Samson, like, what have you done? You got them all mad at us, which there's something there to be said for this Israelite people. God has sent Samson to be the judge, to deliver them, and they seem to be comfortable with the status quo. They're okay with being ruled and oppressed by the Philistines. And so there's a danger there when we get comfortable and are okay with just kind of the status quo. But anyways, we see here Samson, they come to Samson, and Samson says, okay. He says, as long as you don't kill me, yeah, go ahead, fine, hand me over to the Philistines. So they tie him up, and they take him to the Philistine army, and when he gets there, it says he just snaps the ropes off his arms like they're thread, flaxseed, snaps it off, picks up the jawbone of a donkey, must have been a carcass, a fresh one it says, and goes out and starts to fight this army of Philistines and kills 1,000 of them with nothing but the jawbone of a donkey. And so then he defeats this army of the Philistines, and says has a little poem or a little jig for them, he says, and then tosses it. And so here we have a couple things. As we see Samson, he's kind of on this. First, we see he does a personal vengeance. Instead of seeking for God's glory, he's looking for his own. So he goes to get his wife, and now he's just angry. And so he goes on this personal mission and ties the foxes and trying to get revenge. And that's not what God has called us to ever. He's not called us to that. And so instead of seeking God's glory, he sought his own. And then the second thing is that we see here Samson, unlike a lot of the other judges, like you think like Gideon or Samuel or Deborah, like these different judges that relied on community and looked for others. And that's how God's designed us. He's designed us to be in community, and we help one another and we keep each other from getting too far off track. It's one of the reasons that the church is important. And church family is so important. It's not just about teaching and hearing some music in a sermon. You can do that online now. But that church community, and we help one another and spur one another on to go up in good deeds. That verse. But Samson didn't do that. He kind of was a lone ranger. He wanted to do everything himself. And so it's gotten him into trouble. And so after all that, after that, God gives him this extraordinary strength, and he wins this battle. He finds himself very, very thirsty. I guess that would have been tiring. And so he's very thirsty, and so he calls to the Lord, and he says, "You've granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he was revived. And just kind of amazing here where Samson's taken things into his own hands, doing it his way, how he wants to do it, not really seeking after the Lord. Lord, what are you looking for me to do? How do you want me to lead? How do you want me to fulfill this calling? He takes it into his own hands. But then when there's something that's out of his control, he's got no water, he feels like he's going to die, then he calls out to the Lord. And so I was just thinking about that, how often do we kind of live life on our own terms, and then until something comes up where that we can't control, and then we call out to him, to God, to help us. And so it was just a reminder that we should be seeking the Lord every day with every area of our life, not just on Sundays, not just with spiritual things, but in everything we do. Kind of that idea that Paul talks about of praying continually, just being in God's presence, and looking to live a life for His glory, not for our own. And so with that, I just pray that God would bless you and keep you, and make His face to shine upon you. And that idea of His face being upon you is that idea of presence. And so when God go with you today, be present with you today as you go out, and may you know His peace. God bless.